Chapter 4, the Moroni Cipher. In September of 1823, 3 years after his alleged first vision, Joseph Smith made yet another extraordinary claim. This time, he asserted that a spirit had come to him while he was praying for further enlightenment. As Oliver Cowdery recounted in 1835, steadily a light grew, as though the house was filled with consuming and unquenchable fire. Smith claimed that this angel, Moroni, told him that the time was at hand for the gospel in all its fullness to be preached in power unto all nations, and that Smith was to be an instrument in the hands of God in that work. However, I take issue with this account. Smith never mentioned a restoration of the Christian gospel until the 1842 first vision account. If Smith indeed had this visitation with the angel Moroni, why didn't he mention that a restoration was to come in his 1832 or 1838 accounts? By 1842, both the first vision and the Moroni visitation were already said to have taken place. If we follow the 1842 account, then Smith was expecting God or Jesus to restore the gospel. In that context, the Moroni visitation doesn't seem out of place, yet it remains inconsistent with the three earlier accounts. This gap between early and later accounts immediately raises questions about the origins and evolution of Joseph's story. Dream or vision, the sleeping siblings problem. Another issue, though one I will not dwell on extensively, concerns who else was present and whether Smith truly experienced a vision. Smith stated that the angel Moroni visited him 3 times that night, each visit accompanied by a light as bright as the sun and the angel's countenance like a bolt of lightning. If this were the case, why didn't any of Joseph's siblings wake up, especially since the boys shared a room in a very small house? Fair LDS, the apologetic branch of the LDS Church, offers this explanation. God had the power to prevent Joseph's siblings from waking up during Moroni's visit. Genesis tells us that God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. Doctrine and Covenants suggests that one needs to have their spirits quickened in order to perceive angels. It concludes, "It is perfectly reasonable to assume that God simply kept them asleep." I don't know about you, dear reader, but for me, these explanations don't quite hold up, especially the last statement. The only way I can accept these explanations is if Smith's claim was a dream rather than an actual visitation, as dreams and visitations are fundamentally different experiences. Until 1830, Smith, his family, and those around him who heard his account all referred to the experience as a dream. As Martin Harris recounted in an 1840 interview with John A. Clark. Consequently, long before the idea of a golden Bible entered their minds, in their excursions for money digging, which I believe usually occurred at night, they might conceal from others the knowledge of the place where they struck their treasures. Joe used to be usually their guide, putting into a hat a peculiar stone through which he looked to decide where they should begin to dig. It was after one of these night excursions that Joe, while he lay upon his bed, had a remarkable dream. An angel of God seemed to approach him, clad in celestial splendor. The possibility that Smith's claim was a dream is important. It leads us to the next issue with the Moroni account. Martin Harris's comment hints at the magical occult beliefs that Smith and his family held, beliefs crucial for understanding the context of the claimed visitation. The magic circle, treasure-seeking, and the autumnal equinox. Why does Harris say, in their excursions for money digging, which I believe usually occurred at night, they might conceal from others the knowledge of the place where they struck their treasures? It was after one of these night excursions. Harris states this because Joseph Smith Sr. and Jr. were treasure seekers, an established fact acknowledged by LDS church leaders, historians, scholars, and apologists. This activity involved using seer stones, divining rods, and other folk magical practices common in early 19th century New England. However, the apologetic branch of the LDS Church often whitewashes this reality, dismisses the points raised by critics, sidesteps key issues, or outright rejects claims that challenge this history. Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph Smith Jr.'s mother, confirmed this in her account. She stated that we stopped our labor and went at trying to win the faculty of abrac, an enchantment done with an amulet, drawing magic circles, or soothsaying to the neglect of all kinds of business. We never, during our lives, suffered one important interest to swallow up every other obligation. But whilst we worked with our hands, we endeavored to remember the service of and the welfare of our souls. Lucy's description situates the magical practices alongside the family's nightly treasure-seeking expeditions, providing crucial context for understanding how Joseph's own vision, or dream, was framed within the household's occult activities. Bushman attempts to explain away Lucy's comment by claiming that Lucy's point wasn't that they practiced magic, but rather that they weren't lazy, that they hadn't stopped their labor to practice magic. According to Bushman, Lucy was showing her knowledge of formulas and rituals, which she associated with the welfare of our souls. He suggests that magic and religion blended in the Smith family culture. However, Bushman's whitewashing attempt doesn't hold up when we consider Joseph Smith Jr.'s legal troubles 3 years after the Moroni visitation in 1826, which will be addressed later. The crucial point here is that Lucy Mack Smith is a direct witness to the magical practices her family engaged in, and Martin Harris's statement above corroborates her account. This is significant because Harris confirms that the Smith boys were treasure-seeking the night before their claimed Moroni visit. Harris told us that the Smith boys had been out treasure-seeking before returning to bed to resume their task the next day. This took place between September 21st and 23rd, dates significant to occultists and treasure-seekers. During the autumnal equinox, there was a widespread belief in New England folk magic that spirits could cross into the mortal world and reveal treasures such as gold and silver, a practice consistent with contemporary divination and folk ritual manuals. To further illustrate this, Robert C. Smith recounts, "On the night of September 22, 1822, we resolved upon invoking the spirits of the moon, and accordingly, having prepared the circle and used the necessary ceremonies and incantations, abrac, to urge the spirits more powerfully to visible appearance. Our ceremonies began at midnight. Smith was involved in these practices consistently, especially before 1823 and up until at least 1827, if not longer. These dates, coinciding with lunar cycles, solstices, and equinoxes, were considered potent for ritual activity." We will delve deeper into these occult practices when examining Joseph Smith's legal troubles in 1826. The Jewish Holy Days Hypothesis, an apologetic failure. The dates themselves remain critically important. LDS scholars and apologists attempt to whitewash the occult practices by associating the dates with the Jewish New Year, yet their explanations stretch credulity. These recurring September dates indicate that Joseph's reported experiences were likely influenced more by established folk magic and treasure-seeking traditions than by coincidental alignment with Jewish holy days. Within the apologetic branches of FAIR LDS, the Apologetics Division of the LDS Church, and Book of Mormon Central, a Maxwell Institute-funded program, scholars have come up with increasingly convoluted explanations to address the occult significance of the dates. These explanations often attempt to link not only the Jewish New Year, but also other Jewish holidays to the Moroni visit. Why? The Church needed a plausible explanation for why Moroni's visits supposedly took place each year on the exact same date, September 22-23rd, which is also historically associated with occult rituals in early 19th century New England, where spirits were believed to communicate with humans and reveal hidden treasures. So they developed a theory to link Moroni's visit to Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. But they didn't stop there. Let's find out why. I won't list all the scholars who pitched this theory of the Jewish New Year. The footnotes provide their names and works for those interested. Rosh Hashanah fell on September 23rd twice between 1823 and 1827, specifically in 1824 and 1827. So how could all of Moroni's visits occur on Rosh Hashanah in 1825 and 1826? Well, LDS scholars and apologists, in their search for a fitting Jewish holiday, switched to the Jewish High Holy Days as a substitute for Rosh Hashanah. But this still doesn't explain the occult significance of the dates. As shown above, Rosh Hashanah only occurred on September 23rd in 1824 and 1827. Yom Kippur, however, only fell once between 1823 and 1827, in 1825. In 1823, Yom Kippur occurred between September 14th and 15th, a week before Smith's claimed encounter with Moroni. Yom Kippur follows Rosh Hashanah, which fell between September 5th and 7th in 1823. But what about 1826? The Church conveniently omits this year, and the question arises, why? In 1826, Rosh Hashanah took place between October 1st and 3rd, with Yom Kippur following on October 10th and 11th. Thus, the year 1826 does not even remotely align with the purported dates of Moroni's visits. Outside of 1823 and 1827, no other years in this period match up with a Jewish holy day on September 23rd. However, we do have the unchanging, occult significance of the autumnal equinox on September 23rd, which aligns consistently with the claims, unlike the shifting Jewish holidays. This equinox was traditionally recognized in folk magic and treasure-seeking rituals as a moment when spirits were most active and divinatory practices most potent. Unlike Joseph Smith's inconsistent accounts of the first vision, where he cannot recall his age or other key details, Smith is notably clear when recounting the specifics of the Moroni visitation, with journal entries from Lucy Mack Smith, neighbors of the Smith family, which we'll explore in future chapters, and church associates, all confirming the Smith family's involvement in treasure-seeking. It becomes evident that the LDS Church was left with little choice but to create an explanation for the practices they could no longer deny or hide. Unfortunately for the LDS Church, the Jewish Holy Day hypothesis fails to stand up under scrutiny, as demonstrated above. The only viable historical explanation is that the Moroni visitation was timed according to folk magic traditions tied to the autumnal equinox, not divine providence, but calculated ritual. Captain Kidd's Ghost, The Origins of Moroni. Stories of Captain William Kidd's hidden loot were legendary throughout New York and New England, regions where Joseph Smith spent his formative years. Tales of Kidd's buried treasure, rumored to lie in the northeastern United States near the Hudson River, gripped the public imagination. These legends fueled a pervasive obsession with treasure hunting and secret caches, a fixation that profoundly shaped the culture of the early 19th century. The cultural fabric of upstate New York, often referred to as the burned-over district, was thick with stories of buried wealth tied to Kidd. These tales, infused with supernatural elements like spirits guarding the treasures, echoed directly in Smith's accounts of uncovering the so-called golden plates. Joseph's narrative was steeped in this folklore, creating an inextricable link between Kidd's legendary hoards and Smith's treasure-seeking past. Historian Dan Vogel drives this connection home, asserting, "The connection between Joseph Smith's treasure-seeking activities and the legends of Kidd's treasure cannot be ignored. Kidd's treasure was the archetype of buried wealth guarded by spirits, a theme that resonated strongly with Smith's early experiences." Joseph Smith, The Making of a Prophet, 2004. Vogel's conclusion is unshakable. Why? The influence of Kidd's lore isn't merely circumstantial, it's geographical and linguistic. In the Indian Ocean, between Africa and Madagascar, lies the Comoro Archipelago, with its largest island named Comoros and its capital called Moroni. That's right, Moroni, the same name as the angelic figure Joseph Smith claimed guarded the golden plates. These waters were where Captain Kidd killed a crew member, sealing his infamy as a pirate. The linguistic proximity of Comoros to Cumorah and Moroni practically screams for scrutiny. While the connection isn't a direct match for Cumorah's Comoros, the similarities demand exploration. A website called debunkingcsletter.com argues, "The settlement of Moroni did not become the capital city of the Comoros Islands until 1876, 32 years after Joseph's death and 47 years after the publication of the Book of Mormon. The possibility of Joseph seeing the names on a map is remote at best. It has not even been proven that Joseph ever saw the names, or that any source available to him linked them. However, this claim crumbles under scrutiny. While the capital city of the Comoros may not have been officially recognized as Moroni until 1876, the name had been in use long before, dating back to at least 1427. It was one of only 2 key ports in the region during Kidd's time. The significance of Moroni as a well-established port and its prominence in the Indian Ocean means it's entirely plausible that Joseph Smith encountered the name on maps or in historical sources well before 1827. The argument that Joseph could not have seen the name on a map is not only weak, it ignores the widespread circulation of kids' tales and the established maritime routes. Joseph Smith's geographical knowledge, especially regarding the Comoros and the Indian Ocean, is much more likely to have been informed by these widely known stories than the CES letter's dismissive stance suggests. It is not just a remote possibility, it is a far more likely scenario that Joseph Smith, deeply immersed in treasure lore and familiar with the popular accounts of Captain Kidd, would have had ample opportunity to come across the name Moroni during his lifetime. Stories of Kidd's exploits did not remain distant legends of the Indian Ocean. They circulated widely in early 19th century New England, appearing in newspapers, pamphlets, and oral lore, likely shaping the treasure-hunting imagination of young Joseph Smith in upstate New York. A prominent hypothesis links Kidd's treasure lore directly to Hill Cumorah, where Smith claimed to unearth the golden plates in 1827. Local legends of Kidd's treasure may have directly inspired this narrative. The idea of an ancient, hidden record buried in the earth mirrors the myths of Kidd's loot, complete with cryptic maps, markers, and secrets awaiting discovery. Richard Bushman underscores this cultural resonance, writing, "The idea of buried treasure served as a backdrop for Joseph Smith's own story. Whether intentionally or subconsciously, the parallels between Kidd's treasure and the golden plates suggest a shared narrative framework." Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling, 2005. The parallels deepen with the concept of spiritual guardians. Kidd's treasure lore often featured spectral figures or magical enchantments that protected the hidden wealth, accessible only to the worthy or initiated. Joseph Smith's story incorporated a similar motif, with the angel Moroni serving as the divine guardian of the plates. This merging of material treasure and spiritual guardianship is a direct continuation of folkloric traditions. Historian Mark Ashurst McGee captures this dynamic, arguing, "These motifs likely shaped the young Joseph Smith's treasure-seeking ventures and later informed the angelic visitation accounts." Moroni as Angel and Treasure Guardian, 2000. Captain Kidd's story evolved into a potent symbol of discovery, adventure, and hidden knowledge, archetypes that found new life in Joseph Smith's narrative. In the Book of Mormon, Smith reimagined these themes, casting himself as the divinely chosen discoverer of sacred relics. Fawn M. Brody, in her critical biography of Smith, emphasizes this connection. Joseph Smith's treasure-seeking past, steeped in the lore of Kidd's treasure and similar tales, provided a rich source of narrative inspiration for the discovery of the golden plates. No Man Knows My History, 1945. This 19th century obsession with hidden treasures extended beyond Kidd, tapping into a broader cultural fascination with secret knowledge and lost civilizations. Kidd's legends dovetail seamlessly with themes of secrecy, discovery, and divine intervention found in Smith's work. D. Michael Quinn elaborates on this connection, writing, "The folklore surrounding Kidd's treasure provided a framework that Joseph Smith adeptly reimagined, incorporating spiritual and biblical elements to elevate his own treasure story into the realm of sacred history." Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, 1998. The threads of Kidd's legend, interwoven with Smith's narrative, are undeniable, but the maritime connection goes deeper still, not just in folklore, but in the very name Smith chose for his celestial messenger, Moroni or Nephi, the changing angel. For those unfamiliar with the LDS Church, you may wonder why I even consider the possibility that Smith could have been visited by Nephi rather than Moroni. Here's why. In her book, Biographical Sketches of Joseph Smith, the Prophet and His Progenitors for Many Generations, Lucy Mack Smith wrote that Joseph related the following. "He called me by name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Nephi." Why would Joseph's mother mention this? Because Joseph himself said it, according to what he had his scribe W. Phelps write down. His hands were naked, and his arms also a little above the wrist. So also were his feet naked, as were his legs a little above the ankles. His head and neck were also bare. I could discover that he had no other clothing on, but this robe as it was open, so that I could see into his bosom. Not only was his robe exceedingly white, but his whole person was glorious beyond description, and his countenance truly like lightning. The room was exceedingly light, but not so very bright as immediately around his person. When I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. He called me by name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Nephi. Handwriting of James Mulholland, Robert B. Thompson, William W. Phelps, and Willard Richards. LDS apologists claim that there is only one source that mentions Joseph, stating that Nephi, not Moroni, visited him. They argue, critics cite a variety of sources that repeat the Nephi identification. The key point to understand is that there is really only one source that claims the heavenly messenger was Nephi. The other sources which mention Nephi are merely citing this one source, thus perpetuating the error. The problematic document is the June 1839 manuscript history of the Church Book A1, which was a copy of an April 1838 document. James Mulholland copied George W. Robinson's earlier text. The 1838 document is no longer extant. Fair LDS apostle Parley P. Pratt wrote in 1842, "Again, when we read the history of our beloved brother, Joseph Smith, and of the glorious ministry and message of the angel Nephi, which has finally opened a new dispensation to man, and commenced a revolution in the moral, civil, and religious government of the world." Apologists argue that Pratt's mention of Nephi is an error stemming from the 1839 revision of the original 1838 account. However, the issue here is that Pratt knew Joseph Smith personally before the 1838 account was penned, and would have been well aware of any discrepancy between Moroni and Nephi. He would not have mistakenly stated that Joseph saw Nephi, rather than Moroni, in that vision. We could concede that the Nephi account was a mere error, later corrected, if not for the writings of Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mother, and Parley P. Pratt, both independent sources. Their statements corroborating the Nephi account must be taken seriously, and not dismissed by LDS apologists, who claim that later reproductions merely perpetuated an error. Pratt and Lucy Smith's testimonies are critical, independent corroborations of the Nephi story. Joseph Smith was still alive during the 1839 printing, and had he felt the account was an error, he likely would have corrected it. We would have seen contemporaneous accounts of such a correction, but instead, the version of the vision continued to circulate unchanged, at least until it became inconvenient. The question remains, why would Smith initially claim the angel was Nephi, only to later settle on Moroni? The answer may lie in the evolving needs of his narrative. Nephi, as a prominent figure in the Book of Mormon, would have carried immediate weight with early followers familiar with the text. But as Smith's mythology expanded, Moroni, the final guardian and author of the closing chapters, offered a more fitting celestial bookend to the story. The switch wasn't just a correction, it was a recalibration, adjusting the cast of heavenly characters to better serve the growing legend. This pattern of revision, whether in the first vision's multiplying personages or the Moroni vision's shifting messenger, reveals a fundamental truth about Smith's method. His stories were not fixed revelations carved in stone, but living narratives, reshaped and refined as circumstances demanded. The Salamander Letters, when forgery exposed faith. More than a century later, the enduring ambiguities surrounding Joseph Smith's Moroni vision would be exploited in the Mark Hofmann scandal, showing how uncertainties in the historical record could be manipulated for both devotion and deception. But this scandal reveals far more than the cunning of a forger. It exposes the willingness of LDS leadership to purchase documents that contradicted their own carefully curated narrative, suggesting deep institutional anxiety about what might lie buried in their founders' past. Mark Hofmann, born in 1954 to a devout LDS family, served a mission before losing his faith as a young man. Through his exposure to critical information about Joseph Smith, he became disillusioned with the church. Hofmann was well versed in ancient works and historical documents, skills which enabled him to craft sophisticated forgeries. In the 1980s, he presented several forged documents to LDS leaders, who unfortunately purchased them after questionable and inadequate authentication. The most explosive of these forgeries was the so-called Salamander Letter, allegedly written by Martin Harris to W. W. Phelps in 1830. This letter presented a radically different version of the discovery of the golden plates, one steeped not in divine visitation, but in folk magic and occult practice. According to the forged letter, Joseph Smith did not encounter the angel Moroni at Hill Cumorah. Instead, a white salamander appeared, transforming into a spirit that struck Smith and prevented him from obtaining the plates. The letter read, in part, "The spirit transfigured himself from a white salamander in the bottom of the hole and struck me 3 times, and held the treasure and would not let me have it, because I had not obeyed my master and laid the treasure before him." This detail was devastating. In early 19th century treasure hunting lore, salamanders were believed to be spirits that guarded buried treasure, often requiring specific rituals or sacrifices to appease. The letter portrayed Smith not as a prophet receiving divine revelation, but as a failed treasure seeker operating within a well-established folk magic tradition, a tradition the modern LDS Church had worked tirelessly to distance itself from. What makes the Salamander Letter scandal so revealing is not that Hofmann fooled handwriting experts and historians, though he did, but that LDS leaders were willing to purchase and suppress documents that fundamentally undermined their founders' credibility. In 1984, the Church, through intermediaries including apostles Gordon B. Hinckley and Dallin H. Oakes, facilitated the acquisition of the Salamander Letter and related documents for approximately $400,000. Why would church leadership invest such enormous sums in documents that portrayed Joseph Smith in an even less favorable light than critics had imagined? The answer is simple: damage control. If the letter were authentic, its public release would be catastrophic. By purchasing it, the church could control the narrative, study it privately, prepare responses, or simply keep it out of public view. This decision reveals a critical truth. LDS leaders harbored profound doubts about the consistency and reliability of Joseph Smith's own accounts. If they had been confident in the historical record, they would have had no reason to fear these documents. Instead, their actions betrayed an institutional recognition that Smith's narratives contained gaps, contradictions, and vulnerabilities, weaknesses that a sufficiently damaging document could exploit. The fact that they were willing to pay such exorbitant sums for letters describing a salamander spirit rather than an angel demonstrates just how plausible they found the alternative, magic-infused version of Smith's story. After all, the church's own historians knew about Smith's treasure-seeking activities, his use of seer stones, and his family's involvement in folk magic. The Salamander Letter didn't introduce new ideas. It simply made explicit what had long been whispered: the unraveling. Hofmann's scheme began to collapse in 1985, when questions arose about his sources and the provenance of his documents. Facing exposure and financial ruin, Hofmann constructed a series of pipe bombs. On October 15, 1985, 2 bombs exploded in Salt Lake City, killing document collector Stephen Christensen and Kathy Sheets, the wife of Christensen's former business associate. The next day, Hofmann was severely injured by his own bomb as it detonated in his car. The subsequent investigation revealed that all of Hofmann's documents, including the Salamander Letter, were forgeries. He had skillfully aged paper, replicated 19th century ink, and studied historical handwriting with meticulous care. His forgeries were so convincing that they had passed multiple rounds of authentication by experts. But the forensic evidence was undeniable. Hofmann had fabricated the entire corpus. Yet the scandal's true significance lies not in the forgeries themselves, but in what they revealed about the LDS Church's relationship with its own history. The leadership's willingness to covertly purchase potentially damaging documents demonstrated a lack of confidence in their founder's narrative, a recognition that the official story might not withstand scrutiny if inconvenient evidence surfaced. The Salamander Letter matters because it illustrates the fragility of Joseph Smith's visionary accounts. The letter's plausibility, its ability to fool scholars, collectors, and church leaders, rested on a simple fact: it fit seamlessly into the historical context of Smith's life. The occult elements, the treasure-seeking rituals, the guardian spirits, all of these were consistent with what historians already knew about early 19th century New England folk magic and Smith's documented activities. In essence, the Salamander Letter succeeded as a forgery because it told a version of the story that could have been true, grounded in the same cultural milieu that shaped the actual Moroni account. Hofmann understood that Smith's narrative was not an isolated miracle, but a product of its time, one drawing from treasure-hunting lore, folk magic, and widespread beliefs about spirits guarding hidden wealth. The fact that this alternative version seemed plausible enough to command $400,000 from church leadership speaks volumes. It suggests that even those most invested in defending Smith's prophetic claims recognize the thinness of the historical ice upon which those claims rested. The boundaries between Joseph Smith the prophet and Joseph Smith the treasure seeker were always more porous than the church cared to admit. And in the end, the Salamander Letter, though forged, told a kind of truth, that Smith's angelic visitations were never as far removed from folk magic and occult ritual as his followers wanted to believe. The angel Moroni and the white salamander were not opposites. They were two faces of the same 19th century spiritual landscape, shaped by treasure legends, ritual practices, and the enduring belief that spirits guarded hidden things. Whether the guardian was called Moroni, Nephi, or a salamander mattered less than the underlying pattern. A young man steeped in treasure-seeking culture, encountering a supernatural figure on a date steeped in occult significance, claiming access to buried riches that would change the world. The names and details shifted, but the structure remained the same. A story built not on divine revelation, but on the folklore and magic of its time. Revelation or appropriation. Both the first vision and the Moroni visitation appear to have been carefully constructed by Joseph Smith, stories he may never have intended to carry beyond their initial telling. Yet, as the visions resurfaced over time, he reshaped them. The first vision evolved with his beliefs, while the Moroni vision began as a tale of Nephi, before expanding to include the angel Moroni himself. The rituals and legends that framed Joseph's supposed encounter with Moroni did not vanish with the night. They followed him into daylight, guiding his actions and ambitions. The threads connecting Captain Kidd's treasure lore, the Autumnal Equinox rituals, and Smith's own treasure-seeking ventures reveal not divine providence, but cultural inheritance. Smith did not receive his story from heaven. He borrowed it from the folklore, magic, and mythology already circulating through the burned-over district. Hired soon after by Josiah Stoll to uncover hidden treasure, Smith's mystical pursuits would collide with the law in 1826, setting the stage for a life caught between revelation and reality. The pattern established here, of stories adapted, revised, and repackaged to serve evolving needs, would define Smith's prophetic career. The question is not whether he experienced something profound in September 1823, but whether that experience was shaped more by the spirits of folklore than by the divine.